Last week, or April 5th to be precise, there was one very big bit of good news that came in, and that was the Supreme Court ordering Shoma Sen to be released on bail. Who is Shoma Sen? Why was this good news? If you want to understand the answers to those questions and thereby get to know about a case that has shocked India and the world and cast serious questions on the state of India's democracy, then you must read the book I'm recommending today, and that is The Incarcerations by Alpa Shah, who is an anthropologist and an author who also teaches at the London School of Economics. The Incarcerations, Bhima Koregaon and the Search for Democracy in India is an account of each one of the 16 people that included people like Shoma Sen and other activists, academics, intellectuals, journalists, and lawyers who were arrested on charges of inciting violence that had broken out at Bhima Koregaon in January in 2018. Arrested between 2018 and 2020, eventually they were implicated for links to Maoist conspiracies to overthrow the government, as well as a plot to assassinate the Prime Minister. Here is why author Alpa Shah says she felt compelled to tell their story.
The stories of the BK16, they are life stories, are so inspiring. They are so, larger than life. It's a desperate story. It's a shocking story. It's like it'll make you cry, the book. But you read the stories of the BK16 and you will have hope. You will have dreams. You will have imagination for a different India, a different idea of democracy, a different future, which is one which is much more just, one which basically tackles inequalities, one which doesn't just give up, and one which is beyond yourself, where you're working for, the lives of so many more people. And all of them are very different. And in different ways, they bring this out so powerfully.
This book is an intense read. It is sprawling in its scope as it provides the context in which each of these Bhima Koregaon 16 people worked. What are the causes that they believed in? What were their beliefs? What were they dedicated to? Now, the ties between these activists and their work were snapped after they were arrested, and sometimes because of the bail conditions on which they are out now.
Why were they so dangerous? Many of them didn't know each other, most of them didn't know each other. They were picked up from different parts of the country. They were working on different kinds of issues, so what made them so dangerous? What connected them? And I think in the writing of The Incarcerations, what I ended up doing is diving deep into their lives and deep into their scholarship and their work. And there are a few things that I think unite them in the way in which they thought about the world and were fighting for democracy. When we think about democracy, we say, oh, India is the world's largest democracy. And we base that on the fact that, more than 900 million voters are about to vote in the elections, so that the whole ritual of elections is seen as, what shapes democracy. But India has also had a long, deep tradition of people who are fighting on the ground with grassroots social movements for the democratic rights, protection of democratic rights of in some of India's most vulnerable, most marginalized communities, And these traditions of, democratic rights activists, I think really flourished, especially after the Indian emergency, during which Indira Gandhi had really clamped down democratic rights. And after this moment, there were many people who united and said, we have to make sure that this kind of a situation never arises in India again. And who have been working on the ground in so many parts of the country, sometimes connected, sometimes disconnected to each other. And I think all of the people who have been arrested in the Bhima Koregaon case were these kinds of democratic rights activists. And they were working on India's three main minorities. So there was Adivasis. Many were protecting the rights of Adivasis against, the multinational mining companies taking over their lands, against the state atrocities in so much of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh we have seen not only with this regime, but even with the previous regime. They were systematically trying to draw attention to the fake encounters, all these Adivasis thrown into prison as alleged Naxalites with no evidence, still in jail many years later, so many of them. So they were drawing attention to Adivasis. There were those who were working on Dalits and Dalit rights. So you really see this, for example, in the work of Anand Teltumde, who was a Dalit professor, probably one of the most important sociologists and anthropologists of caste in contemporary India. Although, by profession, he is actually a professor of data management, but he writes, sociology and anthropology books by night. And, his work, the Kabir Kala Manch, which is a group of people's poets, a kind of bard working in the city, grew up in the slums of Pune, but whose songs are so powerful against caste oppression, against inequalities, against exploitation, against big capital. And so, we had the Dalit lawyer, Surendra Gadling, the publicist, Sudhir Dawale, these people were all working on Dalit rights in some kind of way. Yeah. And they were also importantly looking at how Dalits should form and can form alliances with other groups like Adivasis, like with Marathas even, in Maharashtra, looking at not just identity politics, but also looking at how people in a similar position need to come together to fight for their rights.
Father Stan Swami's case is perhaps the one that we are most familiar with because of the appalling way in which the Indian state treated this octogenarian activist from Jharkhand who was suffering from Parkinson's disease. He passed away while he was incarcerated in hospital. His arrest and death, a stain on our conscience.
He was an 83-year-old Jesuit priest with severe Parkinson's disease. I think last time I met him, he in Jharkhand at his place called Bagicha. He couldn't even lift a cup to drink water without, his hands were shaking so much, And I knew his life story in not in as depth a way as I discovered in the process of writing the book, but he was somebody who had really devoted 30 years to fighting for the rights of Adivasi people, from their land being taken away by, whether it was the Netrahat firing range or whether it was the Koel Karo Dam or whether it was, the many multinational mining companies that are now trying to get into Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh and that have signed MOUs, memorandums of understandings with the state to get those lands. He was one of those people who had worked with grassroots indigenous rights activists for so long, trying to stop them from getting access to the land and helping people read the Constitution. How do we read the Constitution to protect the rights of Adivasis? There's so much in the Constitution that can be used in this process. And so he was really doing that kind of work, which is very different to, picking up an AK-47 and going around the jungles in the forests of Jharkhand, the people that are doing that, who I also knew,
Part 6 of the book is really scary. This is where Alpa pieces together the international forensics data analysis that was initiated by the defense teams and then followed up by several different global cybersecurity experts and journalistic outfits. And that is because it was found that the evidence that was being used to incarcerate these people had been planted in their devices. From here, the book goes on to make a very, very shocking statement or claim as to who planted this data. I'm not going to tell you who it is here, Alpa, giving us a hint.
When I first started working on this book, we did not yet have any of the forensic reports from Arsenal Consulting, which is the Massachusetts-based firm, which got the electronic devices, the clone copies of the devices, and investigated them. So the police took electronic devices from the BK-16, and all of the evidence used to incarcerate the BK-16 was found on their computers, allegedly, right? So they looked at all of these devices and they found that, this was an astonishing case of not only were the BK16 being hacked, but there had been evidence implanted on their computers. So, they've analyzed the hard drives of several of the BK16, Stan Swamy being the last one that they did, but there was also earlier Rona Wilson and Surinder Gudling's hard drives were analyzed. And these reports started coming out after I started working on the book. And the reports are very comprehensive. They were covered in the Washington Post. They were covered in the Indian media. Arsenal Consulting said, this is just going to take us a few hours. But in fact, it took them 6 months to do their first report. They were working full time on it. So in my book, I realized that there are a whole series of other people in the US who have also got interested in this case. Not because they have been asked by the legal defense team to look at this material, not because they know anything about India, not because they care about the BK16, but just simply because the extent of implantation of evidence in this case has been so extensive. There was only one other comparable case, which was one in Turkey that Arsenal had investigated. So the US professionals, or cyber forensic professionals who are really at the top of the game in the world, many of them started to take an interest in this case, So they started to look at other data. Yeah. And so Arsenal only did they just looked at the implantation of evidence. They didn't look at how this was done and who did it. So that's a whole other story. They said our investigation only goes up to here. So there are these other people which includes this company called Sentinel-1, and they started doing a massive report on this case, spending a lot of time on it. And they hadn't given up till the time they spoke to me any interviews to the Indian press, Indian media. And so they were very generous, and they helped me understand what was going on, what was likely to have happened. They do write reports. They do have public reports, and these you can find on their websites. But if you look at them, they're extremely technical reports. It's very difficult for a layperson to understand them. And what they were saying was that basically this process had happened through, at first we thought maybe it's the Pune police who's involved in doing this implantation of evidence. Maybe it's the police officers who are involved. There were links that were made in the Arsenal report which suggested that there was some relationship, and there really is a relationship between the state authorities making the arrests and the implantation of evidence. But what my book, and I don't want to really give it all away in the conversation, is there's a big 20,000 word chapter on this, which basically shows how it is very likely to have been done by a hacker for hire mercenary gang infrastructure, which has been used to basically, hackers have been hired in order to do this work. And also that, at first I thought, wow, what are these hackers? Oh my God, it sounds so exotic, and where are they? Oh, they must be in the US, I was thinking, but no, it looks like it's all happening, of course, back in India.
Don't let the complexity of this case and this issue intimidate you. Don't let the size of this book daunt you, because if you're someone who is interested in the health, nature, and future of India's democracy, this is essential reading. The Incarcerations by Alpa Shah. Take care.